Luis Diaz has been on the radar of FC Barcelona for this summer transfer window, and in this video we're going to take a look at his profile and also how would he fit into Barcelona's setup if he does fit to it at all. And we're also going to look at what does Hansi Flick wants, and do we prefer him over Nico Williams, and that's all what we will be extrapolating in this video. So as always, do subscribe to the channel. It's going to help us a lot to get this family to grow. We upload weekly content only regarding Barcelona. Let's start. Here's last season's heat map for Nico Williams, and you can see bro is basically hugging the touchline most of the time, and I actually think that is what Barcelona needs, right? We need somebody that can play on the outside, because we've seen with Varane and Joao Felix, we don't need this inverted winger type nonsense, right? We need somebody on the wing. Look at against Manchester City for Luis Diaz. Luis Diaz was operating in the half space and he was mainly helping with the build-up. Look at the lower red mark there and also the central mark. So he was mainly operating in the midfield, and I think that's maybe because of the the overload to isolate tactic or overloading the midfield, right? Although I have to say, against Manchester City, the whole of Liverpool was basically extremely narrow in order to keep up with City, right? And so yeah, that's maybe what affected this. Even though I'm thinking this would not necessarily work at Barcelona, by no means am I suggesting that Luis Diaz is not worthy, right? But you have to look at the situation he was in, right? So Luis Diaz, just imagine yourself, this is Liverpool players now, right? Liverpool's particular play with a single pivot, but Barcelona, we know we like to have a double pivot, right? However, in the build-up phase, Klopp had one of his people come into this area right here, and therefore Luis Diaz had to invert in the build-up phase, right? And therefore the fullback has to go forward. So the situation for Liverpool required Luis Diaz to do this, right? Because Klopp doesn't particularly believe in a double pivot, right? Because many a times you would see that even in the build-up phase, they could find Luis Diaz in this area right here. So the situation for Liverpool required Luis Diaz to actually invert most of the time in the season, the way that they build up. But at Barcelona, you of course see the double pivot, right? And you already saw, we don't know if we're going to see this under Hansi Flick. You see already there's a player there, so there's no need for the player to drop, and therefore we need actually for somebody to stay wide, right? Especially a guy like Nico Williams would be perfect for this. Nico Williams is more suitable for Barcelona in my opinion than Luis Diaz, because like I said, we already have Ferran Torres and most likely have Joao Felix that's already doing this. So do you want two or three of this or the same players, or do you want to have Nico who's constantly going to attack the byline here? Here you see that Luis Diaz is in the half space, but the fact that he's drawing players with him means that there must have been movement, right? And therefore the fullback can go forward. And here you see again, he's very central, but I think Luis Diaz is slightly better than anticipating than a Ferran Torres or a Joao Felix, you know, operating in that half space. And you can see Curtis Jones next to Virgil van Dijk in order to going to receive the ball, you know, drawing players yet again out of position. And therefore they could actually find Luis Diaz in the half space right here, and therefore the fullback does go up forward. So the tactics have really been different to what Barcelona or Xavi has done last season. But like I said, the tactics of Liverpool require Diaz to do this because they don't have a classic number 9. Lewandowski doesn't need a second striker, he needs a midfielder behind him. Again, the circumstances of Liverpool requires Luis Diaz to come centrally, right? He's not an out-and-out winger in my opinion, and they even consider him to be an attacking midfielder when you do research of him, right? Because Darwin Núñez is not that traditional number 9 like we have Lewandowski, right? For an example, if the ball comes through here on that side, Darwin Núñez, he likes to get into these areas and then cross the balls, which Luis Diaz wants to get on the end of, right? He's more like a second striker, right? In my opinion, if we do have Ferran Torres and Joao Felix, do we really need that? Because the runs that he's making is really the runs that you would have Pedri making or Gundogan making of Fermin Lopez. So we need to have a winger that stays out wide, right? And the only time when Nico Williams inverts really is the times when the ball is with him. You can see here that Diaz likes to get in that number 9 position, right? But if Lewandowski is ultimately that wide, I would rather have Pedri and Gundogan, like I said, and Fermin getting into those balls, right? He likes to operate in the half space, even in the build-up. He never stays out wide. And that is ultimately what Barcelona needs. We need that winger that's going to hug the touchline. How many times do you see Luis Diaz actually in the number 9 position? But then again, that's not his fault. Liverpool requires him to do that. However, the thing with Luis Diaz and why I really disqualify him as an option for Barcelona is purely down to one thing. He's very unlikely to take on his man, right? You get that 1 or 2 bursts like every 2 or 3 games from Luis Diaz where he goes around the player, but he never receives the ball in this area right here and then goes around his players, right? He also completes less than 2 dribbles per game. He's the type of guy that runs in behind and wants to receive the ball. And that is exactly what Barcelona don't need. We don't need a player that wants to run in behind most of the time and inverts also most of the time. We need a guy that can receive the ball here and cause all sorts of chaos, just like Lamine Yamal is doing on the other side. And that is where Nico Williams wins the race for me. Like against Manchester United, you can see the perfect example of what Luis Diaz really is in comparison to Nico Williams. Like Andy Robertson circulates the ball, he takes it over to Luis Diaz. Luis Diaz then receives the ball and then Andy Robertson has to run over to the wing, because you will see now that Luis Diaz actually brings the ball back into midfield. I can guarantee you that Nico Williams would have ripped Dalot apart there, trying to run at him, right? He doesn't even pass the ball to his options that he has. He goes and he passes the ball back to Andy Robertson, right? He passes the ball back and then he proceeds to go to the wing, and therefore he wants Andy Robertson then to play the ball in behind Dalot. But I can guarantee you Nico would have had the confidence to rip Dalot apart there, and that's the difference. Here's some key stats that we need to look at for Luis Diaz. You know, his shots per games, it's almost 2.5. You know, some key passes 1.6. His dribbles is also much less. You know, he's, like I said, he's less likely to take a player on. When Nico's, it's 3, almost double that, right? But I want you to take note of something very specific. Look at the crosses here. It's 0.2. Right, so that just tells you that he never finds the byline. He always cuts inside and is more an inverted player. And my question is, do Barcelona really need that? We need a player that can stay wide, right? And his success rate is pretty high, so he's a very technical player. So even though he inverts, he's pretty good, right? And then his expected goals, well, it's almost 10, and he outperformed that, you know, with 13 goals last season. And then his shots, he totally blasted that in the Premier League with 94 shots alone, right? But his conversion rate in terms of the goals, 13%. So that is almost like 12 point something conversion rate for Luis Diaz, right? And look who scored. The website consider Luis Diaz his style of play. He likes to cut inside and he likes to play long balls, and he commits fouls often. Is he really the player that we need? In my opinion, let me know down in the comment section below, because I feel like Barcelona do need Nico Williams more than we need Luis Diaz. I think it's obvious in my opinion. I think we do need Nico Williams more. If you don't even talk about tactics or anything like that, based on the fact that he plays with Lamine, he plays with Pedri, he plays for Spain, who's a very similar style to what Barcelona does, I think it's just more viable for Barcelona to go for Nico Williams. But as always, let me know your comments in the section below and subscribe.